Could I have the PPT up, please? Okay. An absolute pleasure being back here in Hubli, a place I've been to when I was young. Now that means I'm young no more. It's a pleasure being here at TiECon, and I think this effort is an excellent one where you have entrepreneurs from around the region coming here to create this enthusiasm. I'm going to kick off and I'm going to scare you first. I'm going to speak for approximately 45 to 50 minutes, at which point an alarm will go off, and then I will wrap up and then take your Q&A for another 5, 7, 10 minutes, depending on how many questions are possible, if there are any. I'm doing a generic take on the subject of innovation, and the title I've given is How the Small Can Win Big Through Innovations. Essentially, it's my personal experience in the space of innovation. So whatever I'm going to be speaking to you is going to be from my see, touch and feel kind of space. I'm also going to refer oddly to some of my research exercises in the space of innovation. And therefore it's going to be generic. It's not going to be very specific to only marketing, but it's likely to be in the realm of technology, possibly in the realm of finance. I've tried to package everything very hard and fast and tight. I'm going to kick off by talking to you that innovation is a very, very important issue in our lives. If you look at innovation, the first thing is I need to learn how to click. Yeah, innovation is an attitude, and some cultures have it, and some cultures just don't have it. What's the meaning of this? By this I mean I'm still struggling to click. Yeah, some don't. I need to, let me start with an innovation story. I mean, that'll give us a bit of a gap. And this innovation story is about a country called Brazil. Now, Brazil is a very exciting country, and if I ask you what's Brazil famous for, what will you tell me? So, soccer, Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, every one of them. Coffee, my first love, certainly. And the beaches, anything else? The carnival, I mean, depends what you emote with more, stuff like that, the samba, etc. But this case is about none of those. This is a case which is a very old case. The circa of this case is 1974. Brazil is a very famous country for many, many different things, but Brazil in 1974 has a very favorite industry, which is a fast-moving consumer good industry. And this fast-moving consumer good industry is used by a Brazilian every single morning, every single day. It's not toothpaste, it's not soap, it's something called toilet paper. Now, all of us will wonder, what a silly thing to do. Why should you use toilet paper when there's so much of water in Brazil? But some clever marketing guy, some innovative marketing guy went there and said, water is not good, paper is good. And over a period of time, toilet paper consumption has become very big in Brazil. This is an innovation story on market research. So I'm going to be talking different stories, trying to weave together one common picture at the end of it to say how innovation is important for us small people to dream big. This is regarding market research. Brazil has a robust toilet paper industry, but there's a problem. The problem is a good one. 96.3% of people who live in Brazil use toilet paper every single day. 96.3%. That means a very small percentage of people don't use toilet paper. But the problem is there are 62 companies which make toilet paper in Brazil. 62 companies. In India, we don't even have 30 companies which manufacture toilet soap. 62 companies have installed capacity which is 100. But utilization is 37. Now when your installed capacity is 100, utilization is 37. What is your effort? You want to fill up that gap. But you cannot fill up that gap because consumption of toilet paper is not going up in Brazil. Now that is the problem. Now how can consumption of toilet paper go up? You know what kind of a product it is. And that too 96.3% of the people in Brazil are using toilet paper. So the Brazilian toilet paper industry has, for this software industry of theirs, they have an industry body. Like we have CII, we have FICCI, and you have TIE. Like that, they have an industry body called BTPMA. It is Brazilian Toilet Paper Makers Association. Everybody lobbies to be on it, be the president of it, be the vice president of it, be a part of it. It's a very prestigious body. The BTPMA is having an annual general body meeting. 600 people are assembled there. There's chaos in the crowd because consumption of toilet paper is not going up in Brazil. Huge problem. The president of BTPMA sitting out here is worried. But people are saying, do something, increase consumption of toilet paper. Now all of us know, in marketing terms, you can increase consumption of a product only in two ways. Either by increasing the width of distribution of the product, which you cannot do here because 96.3% of the country is already using toilet paper, or by increasing the depth of consumption of the product. By that I mean, if somebody is using 1 yard of toilet paper per day, can you go up to him and say, sir, our industry is in deep trouble? Trouble. You use that word, I didn't. It's in deep trouble. Can you use 1.2 yards? Instead of 1 yard, then consumption will go up by 20%. But as you know, they will ask you to go to hell. Because consumers want to use little rather than more. BTPMA chief got a brilliant idea, and the guy said, there is one way of increasing consumption of toilet paper in Brazil, and that is by getting an intelligent guy called a brand manager. Brand manager. People said, brand manager, what will he do? They said a brand manager comes in with a conceptual framework of mind. He looks at innovation as a practice, he does things differently, and he will create magic out of nothing. And therefore they went to Harvard, they went to MIT, they went to Kellogg. Which 23-year-old young man, just out of an Ivy League MBA, wants to join the toilet paper industry? Just imagine your name on a visiting card, on it saying, brand manager toilet paper. Nobody will even marry you. So, however, one young guy, 23-year-old guy from Kellogg's actually joined, and the guy came up in front of the, BTPMA chief, and the guy asked, sir, what is my target? So the older guy said, the BTPMA chief said, young man, your role is to increase toilet paper consumption in Brazil. He said, yes sir. I felt happy. Your role is to increase toilet paper consumption over 3 years by 20%. The man said, that's my job, sir. What do you want to do, young man? He was asked. And when he was asked what do you want to do, the young man said, sir, at my institute, I've been taught every step you take, every breath you take, market research your way. And the guy said, market research? The older guy. Because most of us react this way when we get older. Market research? Why do you want to market research? We know everything. What do you know, sir? We know the population of Brazil. We know an average Brazilian goes to the loo normally under normal circumstances once in the morning, and when he goes at the end, the consumption occasion demands 1 yard of toilet paper. Multiply population into 365 or 364 days and multiply that into 1 yard, you have total numbers. The young man says, no sir, that is a quantitative number. I want a qualitative item. Qualitative? What do you want to know in qualitative? He says, sir, these are numbers which every Tom, Dick and Harish has. I want a qualitative number, and a qualitative number is something different. So he says, what do you want to understand? He says, I want to understand through market research, believe in market research, what a Brazilian does in the toilet. Market research is the study of what you do, how you do, where you do, with what attitude you do, how long you do, with whom you do, etc., etc., etc. And the young man said, ah. So the older guy reacted. And this is how, when you're non-innovative in market research, you're very numbers distorted, you're not quality distorted. At the same time, the numbers gathering mechanism is most of the time faulty. And therefore, I as a practitioner discourage quantitative studies in any realm, because quantitative studies are pari passu and generic. I encourage more innovative research. And this example of Brazil tells you how they got innovative. So the young man said, the older guy said, okay, give me a questionnaire. Give me 60 questions on a question. I will give it to 600 people in Brazil. We'll extrapolate the results. We'll understand what's happening. Young man said, no sir, that is the wrong way of market research. Because when you give somebody a questionnaire with 60 questions on it, the first 5 it's Ina, Mina, Mina, Ma. First 5 you answer honestly, and the next is Ina, Mina, Mina, Mo. You just garbage in, garbage out. And therefore the older guy says, what do you want to do? He says, I want to do the holistic method of study, not quantitative. What is holistic? He says, I want to do something different. The older guy agrees, and the older guy agrees to the younger guy's suggestion to set up 16mm cameras in about 65 Brazilian bathrooms. They actually took permission from 65 poor Brazilian households. Very, very exploitative, usurpative. But this is 74. These words haven't come in focus as yet. 65 cameras in the Brazilian bathrooms, linked to the light switch in the bathroom. When the man goes into the bathroom, switches on the light, whirr, the camera starts recording the proceedings. And when he finishes and switches off the light, off it goes. 65. This is rough and dirty research. Morning they'll come load the film, evening they'll unload the film, send it to Mexico because it's a Mexican market research firm which is doing it. They study it and then they find out diagnostics. First 3 months data that came out of this research, some 91 days data, was junked. You know why? How many of you are married in this audience? Put up your hands. If you don't put up your hands, you're dangerous. You know, you'll get in trouble. Okay, thank you. Vicariously, you may not be married. Yeah. It's like this. Those of us who are married will understand this better. Why that data was junked. You know, when someone or something is in the house for more than 3 months at a stretch, you tend to think that that someone or something does not exist at all. Tube lights. That's precisely what happened to the camera. In the beginning, first few days everybody hid. First 30 days they hid behind newspapers, did it stylishly, etc., etc. So this was junk. They junked it. After 3 months they forgot the camera was there and people started doing things bindas. And that next 3 months data was rich in its pickings. You know why? Because people were doing things naturally. A one-sheet market research diagnostic statement came in front of the BTPMA brand manager and it said, an average Brazilian sits on the throne for 7 minutes. An average Brazilian who sits on the throne for 7 minutes is bored on the potty. 3. An average Brazilian who sits for 7 minutes and is bored on the potty reads on the potty. And 4. An average Brazilian uses 1 yard of toilet paper per consumption occasion, which we already knew. No other brand manager would have gotten excited. This young, innovative brand manager got very excited. He said, I want to see that film more. Warrior that he was, he said, we want to see more. The research agency asked, what do you want to see? And the guy says, I want to see what they're reading. They went back and they found they weren't reading Karl Marx, they weren't reading Philip Kotler, they were reading the daily newspaper. The guy got excited and he said, I want to see the tapes again. He said, why? I want to see what they're reading in the newspapers. God is in the details of market research. God is in the granularity of understanding rather than in the aggregation of understanding. So the guy went, they focused, and they found out Brazilians were carrying the big newspapers. The last 6 pages of the newspaper were light comic strips, comics. People weren't reading serious stuff, they were reading comics on the potty. And when they went and asked them why, they said, light reading for the light occasion. The entire thing came up. This guy got a brilliant idea from it, innovation. He took toilet paper rolls and printed comic strips on toilet paper rolls. And he created a new product. He kept the product in the bathroom. They watched 3 more months. Now Brazilians were not walking into the loo and carrying the bulky newspaper. Instead he sat on the throne and then he'd take it out from the roller and read and read and read, coinciding with 7 minutes of his reading speed. That much paper would come out and he'd take that paper, and I don't have to explain to you what he did with it. This research resulted in a 376% increase in consumption when they wanted only 20%. Why have I told you this Brazilian story for a start? Just to say, as an introduction, that innovation is a mindset. Some people have it, some people don't have it. Innovation is a cultural thing. Some cultures have it, some cultures don't have it. Innovation is about granularity, depth of understanding. Innovation is about doing things differently. Innovation is about treading different paths. Innovation is not whether you're a small business with no money or a big business with huge money. If all the big businesses with huge money could buy huge innovation, they would be, I don't know where, in stratosphere. Innovation is a mindset which the small have better than the big. And incidentally, employees who work in big organizations are small, and therefore bulk of your innovations come from your employees rather than from the system that employs those employees. Having said that, I must also tell you one thing. I speak a fair bit, and I don't say this bit when I speak to overseas audiences. I say this only when I speak to Indian audiences. Okay? Please, I'll tell you what it is. If this had happened in India, things would be different. An average Indian would have gone to the loo, sat on the potty, taken out the comic strip from the roller, rolled red, and re-rolled it and kept it for the next fellow to read. We Indians are unique, and therefore innovation in India is tough. Hey, having said that, guys, I'm still struggling here. I'm doing something wrong. Okay, India, incidentally, my dear friends, since maybe I'll stand a little this way, is the capital of innovation and entrepreneurship, if you ask me. A nation of entrepreneurs. India is a nation of entrepreneurs, if you ask me. And if you ask me, a nation of shopkeepers. We have 14.6 million shopkeepers in India. 14.6 million. The United States has 8,300 India, 14.6 million. That's the joy. We're a nation of entrepreneurs because we're a nation of small business people. We are a nation of many other things. We're a nation of growers, we're a nation of manufacturers, and we are a nation of service providers, we are a nation of entrepreneurs at large. And of course, India, incidentally, is a nation that believes in Jugaad. And Jugaad is the ultimate innovation, if you really ask me. Having said that, I'm going to talk about two must-have facets of sustainable growth. And the two must-have facets of sustainable growth is, I believe, in my research, I believe, it's innovation and reinvention. I don't look only at innovation, I also look at reinvention. Because, everything is invented. You have to only reinvent. Nothing is there that's not been invented at large. Okay. Having said that, reinventing is a must-have facet. It can touch every aspect of business. It can touch big businesses, it can touch small businesses, it can touch every vertical of industry, and can equally touch the lives of people, rich and poor. And that's very, very important to understand. Most businesses are leveraged to the lives of the rich. Very few businesses are leveraged to the lives of the poor. Now, incidentally, the lives of the rich have already been touched. The rich have been bought over. The rich are saturated. So the market lies only with the poor. At the same time, if you have to attack the poor and make them markets, you have to give them the wherewithal to participate in that economy. And that is going to be a fundamental tectonic shift which most businesses, small and big alike, have to make. Your markets come not only from the rich, from the poor as well. Your markets come not only from the haves, but they come from the have-nots. The haves are going to get saturated. Having said that, there are 91 models of reinventing that I have isolated. But I'm not going to talk about all 91 because I know 1 hour time will not give me that much time. I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 of them. The rest of it, you're welcome to go across to my Twitter handle and actually pick it up. How many of you are on Twitter, by the way? Only so many? This is terrible. I cannot have only so little on Twitter. Okay? So I'm going to give you some incentive to get onto Twitter by the end of the evening. There must be lots more than 91, of course. And let me touch some examples, and one of the few examples that I'm going to touch are reinventing examples, about 5 or 6 of them. Small innovations that win big, because that's a topic from our lives and from what I have seen. I believe there are 3 basic models of innovation. One of the first basic models of innovation is what other theorists have called physical innovation. Physical innovation is when you take a product and you change it into different types. Or you take a service and give it many different avatars. The second is what I call emotional innovation. Because people are consumers, they have emotions. How can you alter the emotions in a person to get that product innovatively placed in that person's mind? So I'm going to give you some examples of emotional innovation. I'm also going to talk about self-actualization innovation. Self-actualization innovation is innovation that hits people after they've reached the top of the pyramid. Top of the pyramid. What is top of the pyramid? Most of us, as Maslow has told us, we have roti, kapda, makan needs, food, clothing, shelter, and sex needs. After we have fulfilled that, we climb up, we climb up, we climb up, social needs, up, till we reach the self-actualization needs, when I've achieved everything in life, and this is the time for me to give back to people. And a classic example is Mr. Gururaj Deshpande himself, if you look at it. So if you ask me, what is giving back? That's called self-actualization innovation. And I'm going to talk about one example of self-actualization innovation as well. That's a recent paper of mine, but I'll also give you a clue as to where to pick it up maybe. Reinvent won the market. One of the important things we need to understand in innovation is that there's something called a market. I've drawn a pyramid in the market. There's a concept called the next 5 billion. This is not my concept. It's a WMC concept. It's a World Bank concept. It simply says that there are 7 billion people in the world. You agree? 7 billion? We made some hangama recently that the 7 billionth baby was born in Lucknow or something like that. I don't know how you keep track of it. 7 billion people in the world. The top 2 billion people are the rich and the empowered. They are the people who partake of products and services. You and I belong to the top 2 billion. The people outside this room, in the villages of our country, and even in our villages we have lots of people like you and I, but in the remotest corners of the country where there isn't wherewithal, they are the 5 billion. Guess what? Markets of the future will come not from the 2 billion, but from the 5 billion. So how do you open up the 5 billion? Do any of you in this room have a business plan for the 5 billion market and not for the 2 billion market? The 2 billion market have money, the 5 billion don't have money. Which means that can you reinvent your business, whatever you are in? You could be in a beauty parlor business. Can you reinvent your beauty parlor business for the bottom of the pyramid people? Because they also have needs, they have wants, they have desires. It's like this. 7 billion people are there. They're all the same. The only difference is 2 billion have money, 5 billion don't have money. But all 7 billion have a stomach. Into that stomach, food needs to go in. And fortunately, we eat 3 times a day. Which means in India, if we have 1.2 billion people, we need to eat 3 meals a day. It's 3.6 billion meals every single day that we eat. What a huge opportunity. And guess what? That 5 billion has stomachs. 5 billion stomachs. How will you satiate those 5 billion stomachs with product offerings? That is the thought. So if you ask me, one of the first innovative aspects you have to leverage in your business is, who are you catering to? Are you catering to that 5 billion? 5 billion you can't cater immediately. Top of the pyramid of the 5 billion, at least you can start. Then go a little lower, then go a little lower, then go a little lower, till you have finally reached the gut of the market. So that is thought 1 in terms of saying how you can leverage markets, how you can pull up the markets, and the next 5 billion concept as to how you can get there. Reinvent 2, I'm going to tell you, I've written many papers in my life. One of the papers I've really enjoyed writing about is what I call the new rat trap syndrome. New rat trap. The new rat trap syndrome is simply this. I wrote this paper about 3 years ago. You can pick it up from my Twitter handle. Rat trap. And I come from Bangalore. I come from ITES city. So I use IT language when I describe the rat trap. There's a mouse trap. How many of you used a rat trap in your house till now to catch rats? Put up your hands. Or kill rats. Thank you. We're all human beings, Indians. We have rat problem. Version 1.0 of rat trap is one flat wooden piece, one item like this, one spring here. A rat comes, you put cheese in it. No, we never use cheese in India. We put copra. Cheese is expensive. Cheese is for me. Put copra, and rat comes, bites into it, katak, it goes, and early morning when the housewife comes out into the kitchen, a dead body of a rat, eyes gouged out, blood all over, but she's happy that the rat has been disposed of. This is rat trap version 1.0. This is rat trap cruel version 1.0. This is practical version. This is a rat trap. How many of you used a rat trap like this in your houses? Put up your hands. Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. Yeah, okay. People said we should develop from this. This is rat trap which has been used in the country for 45 years. And suddenly, in the year 78, 79, people say we want a refined rat trap. They take the same instrument, a scientist sits down maybe, somebody who's an inventor, puts the same device inside a box. And it's got a trap door. The rat has to go deep into the box, eat into the cobra, and then the box slaps shut. Only a small portion of the tail of the rat is cut off in the morning. You understand? And that morning you go to the kitchen, coochie coochie coo, the rat is inside the cage, and what do? You call Shantabai, Shantabai comes, your servant, maid servant. Shantabai is given the task of filling a bucket in the bathroom. She takes this, dips it into the water, till the bubbles stop, she kills the rat in your bathroom. Version 1.0 brought bad karma to you, because you killed a rat in your kitchen, and you killed the rat. Version 2.0, in a box, you outsource the killing to Shantabai. But bad karma, geographically bad karma was still in your house. Version 3.0, the sticky pad, kachak. Again the rat has to be killed, because if it's let loose it will come back to your place, because it's got memory. And it's got smell memory, sensorials. Version 4.0, a rat trap which is not even a rat trap. First, version 1.0, cruel, less cruel, and bad karma. Version 4.0, rat trap is not even a rat trap. Jump out of the box innovation. One little small white tablet. Rat comes and eats that tablet in your house. Within 6 hours, it goes to your neighbor's house and dies. Bad karma goes to neighbor's house to The reason I am telling you this rat trap, rat box innovation is simply to say that even in a low-end item like a rat trap, there's innovation. Why could we not live with that one rat trap, cruel rat trap? Why these innovations? Because people are developing to be higher end animals as we go along, and we want higher end goals that we have in our minds to be sustained. So if you ask me, the rat trap, as I see it, is a case of reinvention, and we keep reinventing all the time. The search is on from the brutal to the suave, and if you really ask me, this search is going to be continuous. The future is not going to be even this tablet, because people will say it causes a brain hemorrhage of the rat, which is wrong, so you must do something else to kill a rat. So we might get into family planning related to rats. And someone will then say, how dare you family plan the rat's family? So that becomes a problem. Food. Reinvent food. Food is being reinvented, my dear friends, in a dramatic manner. What is happening in the food area? Let me go quick. Food on the table is on the move. Let me give you an example. In the old days, I used to visit Germany, and vegetarians, please forgive me for this, because I'm going to describe something gory. Food on the table is on the move. Whenever I used to go to Germany, in Berlin particularly, the buffets used to be horrendous buffets. Germans are big eaters, as all of us know. Center of the buffet would be a large round table. On the large round table, there will be a fish larger than me. Okay, literally. Fully baked. They have large ovens. They've taken a fish, put it intact in it, and they baked it, and the fish is there with eyes, etc. They open the mouth of the fish and put a big watermelon into it. See how big the fish is. And what do? They've got 50 kinds of sauces around the fish. You go take your knife cruelly and put it into that fish, take out the flesh, put it into your plate, put those sauces and relish it. This is cruel foods, as I call it. My recent trip to Berlin, walked into the Marriott, and the Marriott, I'm looking around to see cruelty again. There's no cruelty. I go to that center table, no cruelty, there are only brinjals there. What? The world is turning vegetarian? No, the German can never turn vegetarian. No. What they've done, and there's a small label on the desk, it says cat, fish, aubergines. Aubergines means brinjals. how can a brinjal be made out of catfish? What they've done is, they've taken the full fish, they think it's cruelty to keep it on the table. They've taken only the flesh of the fish, made it into little balls, put stalks on it, brinjal stalks on it, painted the rest of the flesh purple and kept it there nicely. Catfish brinjals. If you as a vegetarian walk in there, "Arey, badnekai there," and you pick it up, you know what will happen. You know what will happen. But this is the way the world is morphing. Is this innovation? Yes, it is innovation. So innovation need not be big at all. Innovation need not be about a system. It need not be about a process. Innovation is only an idea. And if you have those ideas, you can deepen them into marketing thoughts, into business thoughts, into social thoughts, more importantly. Okay, food is on the move from brutality to soft food, as I told you, the catfish aubergines, and of course, there are all kinds of other things. Flambe foods with drama, you go to a restaurant, there's drama foods, and of course, to square watermelons, all of you know that square watermelons were invented in Japan, because one fine day they said that a 9-ton lorry carries only 6 tons of watermelon, which means that 3 tons of space is wasted. You know why 3 tons of space is wasted? Because between watermelons, there are round little holes and spaces, and you can't waste that kind of stuff. So what happens? What do? They say, God made watermelons round, we'll make them square. And they made it square, and a 9-ton lorry carries 9 tons of watermelon. Efficiency shoots up by that gap of 3 tons. 3 tons, that is 33.33 recurring, is the efficiency in terms of transportation ability of a van that they're talking about. So you're really talking about big stuff happening here. That's innovation as well. The onsen, Japan, coffee, my first love. I mean, coffee to bathe in. I've been to an onsen in Japan where I've sat in a huge coffee cup and filled with coffee. And they ask you, "Sir, would you like Indian Robusta? Would you like a Guatemalan Conelons?" They ask you that. You bathe in coffee? That's an innovation. Of course, it costs the earth, and it's an obscene thing to do. But what is it all about? Using a product for a different kind of use. And of course, fast food to slow food. There are examples where you go and catch your own food. And one of my examples is from Brighton, near London. You go there on the highway, on the drive between London to Brighton. I saw a long banner which goes SLOOOW ... food. I was wondering, what is this? I walked in there and they said, "Yes sir, slow food." Slow food is the antithesis of fast food. Fast food, you go to McDonald's, they'll throw you out of that place in 7 minutes. Throw you out. This place, "Sir, do you have 3 hours for your lunch?" 3 hours? What do you do in 3 hours? "No sir, you come in. We have got our gardens." They give you a basket and they say, "Please go pick the herbs and the vegetables that you want to eat." So you go and pluck, tender. And then they have a whole range of masalas which are kept around. Some of them have Indian masalas also. You can go pick them up. And, "Sir, you're non-vegetarian?" "Yes sir, we have livestock." "Where are they?" "Well, the chickens are all over in the field." "You want to eat a chicken? Go catch a chicken." And believe it or not, that is the time of your life when you think, "I am not a non-vegetarian." Because catching a chicken is a very difficult thing. Leave catching. "Sir, you want to eat that chicken? You'll have to cut it on your own, sir." But what do most people do? Even those who are non-vegetarian get everything pre-packaged and ready-made in front of them. They don't know the cruelty they are creating there, and therefore they don't know. But here you know. And that slow food revolution is possibly yet another revolution that we can talk about. Fashions, well, good. I have another 11 minutes to go before 13 minutes to go before my question time. I'll go quick. Fashions, what's next in fashion? What's the latest in Hubli? Can you tell me? Latest fashion, anybody?
Modi Kurta.
Modi Kurta, nice. Okay, I'll show you what's fashionable in Japan. Okay, this is, by the way, on the flight here, I was trying to calculate what is the size of this industry, of this innovation. This is an innovation piece. The size of this innovation is 4,600 crores Indian rupees in 1 year. 1 year after this product hit the market. In 1 year, they made 4,600 crores. I'll quickly show you these visuals. I hope they move fast because that's important. Let's forget the scenario plans for now. This from Tokyo and Osaka. Pictures from Tokyo and Osaka. They're spreading like wildfires. This is at a Japanese music store. Okay. This is a product. Okay. You have to guess the product as it goes. Reinventing fashion. This is what they're doing. On a Japanese escalator. This is exactly the product from a Japanese escalator. Oh, I'm having a problem with this. Okay, at a Japanese mall, this is exactly what you find in a Japanese mall. And this is at a Japanese supermarket. Okay, this is a fashionable item. It's called Reinventing Fashion. It's an undisclosed location. All I want to tell you is, please, if you look carefully, these are not see-through skirts, but they're printed skirts. Printed skirts. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah? So if you look at it, 4,300 crores on the printed skirt business. Somebody thought this to be innovation, and somebody thought it was fashionable. It created a lot of laugh, not only in Japan, but across the world. And that's innovation. And that's 4,300 crores. Let's talk about concepts. Let's forget concepts. Let's look to promotions. You know, there's a promotion which I want to talk to you from the United States, and this is the Milwaukee cockroach promotion. You know, in Milwaukee, there's a company which actually makes canisters which are like HIT. You know HIT? Yeah. You know, we aim at a cockroach, kills it, etc. It's going through tough times in the US because of the CFC issue, and you know, and this is a canister, etc. Their sales were down. They went into Milwaukee. They took a full-page ad in the Milwaukee local newspaper, and it said that there is a great cockroach hunt which they're organizing. What they did is they got hold of 5 healthy American cockroaches. If you go to the US, you really understand what health is. You got hold of 5 healthy American cockroaches, 5 big fellows, stunned them, turned them on their bellies. Now we've got technology, they barcoded their bellies, okay, and let loose these cockroaches in the sewer system of Milwaukee. And the ad said, we have let loose 5 cockroaches into the sewer system. Anybody who catches any of these alive, dead or alive, but not squashed, will get $50,000 US per cockroach. Husbands sent their husbands away, and after that they went on a cockroach hunt. And how can you hunt? You have to hunt with the spray. So went to the shops, bought up all the sprays. Sales went up through the roof, okay? And sales volume went up 3,600% in 3 months, okay? And husbands went to work, and the women went to work, and the working women and the men in their jacket pockets, they took out the canister. When they went to the loo, they were trying to catch cockroaches. It became a huge rage, like the great American gold rush. This was an innovative promotion which created 3,600% increase in the sale volume of the company. Finance, the pygmy little drops concept. Syndicate Bank in India was one of the first ones which actually started this business of doing the pygmy collection scheme. It's attracted the bottom 5 billion actually. It went to shopkeepers and collected 1 rupee per person per house, and it was a little drops promotion. None of us do this anymore because most of us think it is infra-dig to approach those who don't have money. For money. The bank on bike, which is an ICICI innovation. The bank is on a bike, the bank is on a mobile phone, bank is on an iPad, the guy is going around, he's got lots of money in his pocket and in his backpack. He goes village to village and everyone has a bank account. Who has a bank account comes to him. They want to put money in, they can give him money and he gives them an immediate receipt. They want to draw money, he gives money out to them. They all know that he comes every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. to the village, so they wait for him to come. Of course, in places like Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., they've decided to kidnap these bank on bikes, because it's a good revenue model on its own. Crowd financing is an idea whose time has come. I'm not going to go into depth on it right now. The cash on delivery in e-commerce, I do a fair bit of work in the e-commerce industry. Cash on delivery is a unique Indian innovation because, Indians don't trust the credit card and we don't want to pay online. So most of the time cash on delivery is a big play. And e-commerce companies in this country, including Amazon, have adopted, this business of cash on delivery. And cash on delivery works beautifully because, the product comes to you, you take the product and pay the cash. Because you don't trust anybody dealing with your credit card, or you don't want to wait for 7 days of your credit card money parked somewhere. So of course there are returns, and of course there are problems here, and the biggest person who makes the biggest money is the courier when you return the stock, because he makes money one way taking it to you, one way taking it back to you. When the courier is bringing the stock to you, he's hoping that you will send it back. The deposit scheme of IRCTC, etc. I won't go too much into that, I don't have time for that. I'll just talk about one more thing and then get into questions. Technology, I think, simple technology, the elevator switch. In the old days, the elevator switches used to be, particularly in the tall buildings of the Western world, all the elevator switches were inside. So there was an algorithm that could get in and actually plan where the elevator will go, how, when it should go, etc. But it knows it only when the person is inside. Okay, so you're locked into it. Now, there are 6 elevators and there's a central console. Anybody who's standing downstairs goes and punches the floor that they want to go. And there's a calculation again, and suddenly elevators come and flash which floors they're going up to. So there's optimization of energy, etc. that go about it. And when you are in the realm of innovation, you must not only innovate but talk about it. I'll give you one example of my company. We work with a hotel company, a large hotel company in India of Indian origin. Has a large number of properties. The hotel had a problem, and we started working with this company in innovation space only then. The problem is that, they went out, hotels, all of us have stayed in hotels, and how many of you have had a bath in a hotel bathroom? Put up your hands. If you don't put up your hands, it means hygiene problems. Thank you. I'm just exercising you, okay? So I go on for another 5 minutes, then we close. There's a standard problem. When you bathe in a hotel bathroom, the hotel bathroom has got a big mirror. After you bathe, the mirror fogs, right? So what do we do normally? After we finish the bath, we take our towel and wipe a part of the towel. Depending which part of your body you want to see first, you wipe that part and you see your body, correct? That's practicality. This is a 5-star hotel chain, and therefore it says, no, this is wrong. Why should people wipe? And therefore they go to Japan, bring a piece of technology. Not technology really, it's a simple technology. If you put tube lights behind the glass will not fog, the mirror will not fog. So they put tube lights and they felt very happy. But the hotel is a hotel. It has spent an amount of money on this technology it has brought in, transferred to its property. And it needs to make a hangama. Guests stay in the hotel, they're going out, they're giving them small little slips, feedback. Sir, did you find the room interesting? Anything interesting? Nobody's talking about this innovation. They spend so much money, they call us in. So what do? We go in there, and we know that a fair number of foreigners of other country origin stay in 5-star hotels. Went and did measurements of various 5-star people who stay, Europeans, Caucasians, as well as North Americans, etc., and Indians. And then we found out there's a particular height at which the face is, and we also found out what's the feet, how much. It's about 1 feet by 1 feet kind of a thing. We took a square. We didn't put the mirrors all around the mirror, only up to the face level. At one point we put a square block into which the light source was there. So now the guest actually went in, started bathing. Entire mirror was fogged except that small square bit in which his face was seen. And they said, Viola, what a lovely innovation! And the hotel got positive scores. What am I trying to say? You must not only innovate, but you must also talk and tell people that you've innovated, because otherwise your innovation could fall through the slats. Again, disadvantage marketing. I don't have time for disadvantage marketing, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about something else instead. Let's talk about iGen and digital innovation. I mean, I think there is something called the iGen, and iGen is not the internet generation. It is what I call the impatient generation. How many of you people are impatient? Please put up your hands. Yeah, okay, good to see that. But I hope it's a minority in this room as well. Young people are more impatient than old people. Older you are, the more patient you are. Because most of us older people tend to have this business of saying, patience. We are patient marketeers. We are patient husbands. We are patient wives. We are patient people. The new generation does not believe in patience. Just go and touch the new generation. You know why? Because they are impatient. And the reality of the market in which you work, there are more young people than old people. 54% of the population of this country is below the age of 25. 54%. How many of you in this room are below the age of 25? Put up your hands. Okay. You are 54% of the population, by the way. Guess what? It's an utter minority in this room. Older people manage businesses which cater to younger people. It's a hegemony of the older people on the younger people. Older people don't understand younger people because we are older. They're younger. They don't know what they're doing. What do you tell your 15-year-old son when he comes up and tells you, "Dad, I'm in love"? Is this the time to be in love? Huh? Is there a time to be in love? Please ask Mr. Digvijay Singh. If you really ask me, older people don't understand younger people. The market in India is of younger people. 54% of the population of this country is young. We older people don't understand them, but we run businesses for them. Mistake number one. If you're innovative, you link your business to the young. Even if you're not young, act young, think young, party young. How many of you in this room have been to a discotheque where young people love to dance? Okay. Says it all. It's a minority here. Never mind how old you are. Okay. I'm all of 49 years and I still go to a discotheque for academic reasons. Lest you think otherwise. Okay. No, I'm not encouraging you to go to a discotheque. All I'm saying is be in touch with the young people. If you get divorced from young people, your business will go nowhere. All businesses are young businesses now. Your employees are young, aggressively young. I work a fair bit in IT, ITES, etc. I told you. Young, aggressive people. Young people, extremely intelligent and impatient. I'll give you an impatient story and then close. I have a 16-year-old son who was 14 then. Okay, he went to school. There was a school election going on. He stood for this position of a sports secretary or something. Came back home in the evening, accidentally finds his father in the house. Father looked at him, he's looking very depressed. So I go up to him and say, "Son, it's okay. Winning and losing is a part of the game." This is Gyan. Winning and losing is part of the game. He pushes my hand off. 14-year-olds, if any of you have 14-year-olds, will know how 14-year-olds talk to their father. "No, Appa." He calls me Appa. "Appa, I did not lose." And I said, "What happened? Why are you depressed?" He says, "Election happened in the morning, results haven't come out." Impatient fellow. So I sat him down and I said, "Don't be impatient." Then I asked him, "When are results going to come out?" 4 days later. Now I'm also getting impatient. But still, being an older guy, father, sat him down, gave him Gyan. First 20 minutes I spoke to him about Mahatma Gandhi. What Gandhiji had to say about patience. My son comes from a generation which does not emote with Mahatma Gandhi at all. He rather emotes with, the only Gandhi he emotes with is Rahul Gandhi. And even he, you know what the problem is. Then I spoke to him, understanding there's some problem, I spoke to him about Swami Vivekananda. What Vivekananda ji had to talk to us about patience. Something that we are all proud of. My son, 14-year-old then, does not emote with Swami Vivekananda. We were celebrating Swami Vivekananda's 148th birthday at that time, I think. Does not emote with him. He comes from a generation that would rather emote with Swami Nityananda. Sat down. After 20 minutes of giving him Gyan, he looks at me and says, "This is the attitude of the generation you market to." He looks at me and he says, "Appa, tell me one thing. When you can be impatient, why be patient?" We older people don't have an answer to that. When you can be impatient, why be patient? And that's my 48-minute alarm. We will close in another 2 minutes and take your questions. You understand what impatience is? You're marketing to those kind of people. They don't have bandwidth. An average individual in India, by the time he touches 25, is a veteran of 42,000 emails. He's a veteran of 18,600 hours on WhatsApp. He is a veteran on Twitter he's a veteran on Facebook, he's a veteran on Flickr, he's a veteran on Pinterest, he's a completely digitally energized gentleman with a time span of an ant or a mind span of an ant for anything which is very specific. So what are we doing? We're marketing to an impatient generation with patient marketing skills. That must go. Patience is gone. Forget it. The Twitter generation. Are you one of the Twitter generation? You're not. Most of you are not. So I'd like you guys to get onto Twitter for sure because it gives you fantastic business ideas. I'm not promoting Twitter, but all I'd like to say, it's not a client of mine, but it's a great place to be because you get brilliant ideas. And the incentive I want to give you is anybody who wants to pick up a paper of mine after hearing some of the innovation stories, you can get my paper on my Twitter handle, which I'll give you in a while. Okay. In summary, my dear friends, I'm going to close in these 2 minutes. Forecasting is dead. Planning is dead. Sadly, cycles are dead, if not shortened. I don't believe in forecasting tools anymore. I don't believe in planning tools anymore. I believe in scenario plans. Change is it, dramatic change, unforeseeable change even in our lives. Reinventing is it, because without reinventing you can't go anywhere. Reinvent finance, reinvent everything, reinvent marketing, reinvent nothing else is the cutting edge tool to grapple with in the future except reinvention. You have to reinvent consumers, markets, products and services. In sum, I've just morphed an old saying, choose your business model. Model 1 is business model that makes things happen. And model 2 is business model that watches things happen. And model 3 is business model that wonders what happened. If you really choose model 1, which is business model that thinks innovation is it. You can't do without innovation. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you. I promise to give you some contacts to be in touch. And here are the contacts. Here is an email ID for you. I'm on LinkedIn as well. You're welcome to come to Twitter on @HarishBajur. And now I'm ready to take some questions if any of you have questions. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. It's nice, inspiring that creative brand and innovation can make a lot of differences. Harish, we are having some questions. What is the difference between branding and advertising?
Okay. Typically, advertising is execution, whereas branding is strategy. The way I look at it, you start with branding. Every business must have a brand strategy where you think who your consumer is, where he or she lives, what is it that you need to offer them, and you need to package it and offer to them as a part of strategy. Once your strategy is put into place, advertising kicks in. And advertising is the execution part as to what kind of a model is necessary to be put in there, what kind of a theme needs to be there, what kind of story needs to be told, how long will it take for the story to be told, and what are the subliminal cues that you need to put into that piece of advertising to make it really, really relevant, original, and innovative to the customer. In short, branding is strategy, advertising is the execution.
One more question. What is the scope for franchising of BFSI since with a special context to the rural market, Tier 2 or Tier 3 towns?
Well, the idea is very simple that rural markets are the biggest markets, and if you have an interest in rural markets and if you are talking of franchisee systems for rural, it's a great opportunity. Important pieces of numbers, 69.1% of the population of this country lives in rural markets, which means that we are a minority. Those who live in urban markets are minorities. The 69.1% which lives in rural markets are as rich as those who live in urban markets. Okay, and it's a myth to say that there are two different types of people. There's something called bottom of the pyramid, and bottom of the pyramid lives in rural markets. It's wrong. When Dr. Prahlad was alive, I've had several debates with him because he has this concept called bottom of the pyramid. And I've debated endlessly the fact that bottom of the pyramid as a concept is fine, but people who are poor don't necessarily live in rural markets. The very, very rich live in rural markets. So your franchise has fantastic opportunities.
What are the key aspects of building brand?
Well, one of the key aspects of building a brand is understanding, consumer understanding. You cannot build a brand without understanding your consumer. Therefore, one of the first things you need to do is clearly define who your consumer is. Once you have decided who your consumer is, it's important to go down and understand the consumer better. I keep telling people that you must live like a consumer, think like a consumer, breathe like a consumer, smell the sweat of the consumer, because if you don't, you get disconnected. So understanding the consumer is the first bit. Many of us get pompous because we are rich people, we have businesses, we have a car, and we disconnect ourselves from local people. If you're a person who's manufacturing a deodorant, and if you are a person who wants to understand your consumers, you need to travel in the Mumbai local and understand exactly what happens with deodorant market, how those guys are hanging on there and what their needs are. So if you really ask me, you have to be in the thick of the market. You have to understand it firsthand, and do not outsource this understanding to a third party. Insource this understanding into your own system, because that's how you are going to develop deeper insight management systems within your own situation.
How does a small company with no resource create a brand?
Oh, small is not the idea, it's the idea which is the idea. By that I mean, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I had a dear friend of mine who's no more. He used to head up NASSCOM, a guy called Devang Mehta. Devang died young in Australia under mysterious circumstances in his hotel room. Devang and I were trying to do something for the Indian handicrafts sector. We wanted to say that we have so many myriad types of handicrafts, but the government does its wee little bit behind it, but it hasn't gained traction at all. So how can we get our handicrafts, which don't have money, out there? So we picked up a sector called the Jhadu sector. This is much before Arvind Kejriwal even dreamt there was an item called Jhadu. So we looked at that. So I looked at the Jhadu and I said, what is a Jhadu? Because I didn't even know what a Jhadu was. Finally we did some research, again insight, market work. And we found out that the Jhadu is essentially an output of a plant. It's the spare part of the main plant. I mean, you take the seeds out and we consume the seeds, and the rest of the plant is made into a dried up Jhadu. Then we went deeper, granular, tried to understand how many types of Jhadus are there in the country. We found out there are 455 types of Jhadus because there are 455 types of plants in the country. And every Jhadu in a different area is a different kind of a Jhadu. So then we picked up only 8 kinds of Jhadus. Then we went into the story of where the Jhadu is grown, the flora and the fauna that happen around the Jhadu, the eco story of the Jhadu. We looked at the organic profile of the Jhadu, and at the end of the day we picked up, we went to these 8 places, picked up a Jhadu. We bought one Jhadu for 5 rupees per Jhadu those days, when the going price of a Jhadu was 2 rupees 20 paise in the market. So Jhadu walas gave us Jhadus, in large numbers. Picked that up and we took a single Jhadu and we took sandwich glass cases. These display cases, sandwich glass, and we put a glass in front. In the middle we put one Jhadu, had a nice brass buckle onto the Jhadu, a small little tag at the bottom describing the Jhadu name, a small little leaflet which described the ecosystem in which the Jhadu has grown, what is a Jhadu, and the frame was a beautiful frame. We exported 8 containers of these frames to the United States of America. Okay, and each Jhadu in a frame sold at $252 US then. Okay, and then we brought the money back and we created a small foundation into which the money went, and it went back to these promoting local items. So it's not about being small, it's about the idea behind taking any small thing and running ahead. Yeah.
So what are the do's and don'ts in creating brand?
One of the first things in don'ts in creating branding is don't be pompous that you know your business. None of you and I in my room must ever imagine we know our businesses, because pomposity is the first stumbling block. Give faith to the consumer, harvest his or her insight, cater to the consumer, keep your finger on the pulse of the consumer on a continuous basis, and you won't go wrong in branding.
Yeah, the last question. What, according to you, is brand?
Oh, my definition of a brand is a simple one. Professor David Acker defines the brand differently. Professor Kapferer defines it differently. one of the definitions, prominent definitions of a brand is a promise. That's what some people define it as. My definition is a different one. 8 years ago, I put my own definition. You could read my paper on that. It simply says the following. I say the brand is a thought. Full stop. The brand is a thought. A thought that lives in a person's mind. Thai, Hubli, is not this auditorium, not the Deshpande auditorium, is not the people around here. Thai is a thought. A brand is not the physicality, but a brand is a metaphysicality. So the brand is a thought that lives in a person's mind. That person need not be a consumer. The thought of Thai lives in the mind of the guard who's standing outside this auditorium today saying there's a Thai function. He's not a consumer of Thai, but the thought lives there. So simply, the brand is a thought. All thoughts are brands. In your head, there are super brands. If I ask you who is your super brand, you might say my grandfather or my grandmother. Your grandmother's thought rubs shoulders with Surf, with Tata, with Amul, with all these brands. Brand is nothing but a thought that lives in your mind. When I speak to overseas audiences, happened to me recently in Sweden. They love Indian words in Sweden. So I was speaking to a large group of 400 people, talked to them and they said, Mr. Bijur, would you describe the brand using an Indian word? What is a brand? No, he put me on the map. And I said, my friend, the brand is Maya. Maya. It is here, and at the same time it is not here. The brand is a thought that lives in your mind, and the brand is certainly mine.
Thank you, Manish. We are really inspired by hearing your talk. I will call upon Rekha to give a token of love. Thank you. I will hand over the mic to Priyanka.